That is the Atkinson sisters coming to a church near you in the days to come. Thank you, Violet. Thank you, Lily Kate. Let's turn again tonight to Mark's Gospel, chapter 3. Mark chapter 3, if you can find a Bible there, it might be helpful to have one before you. We find here in this passage the second of three passages in a row that bring up the reality of demons and what we call today spiritual warfare. The first we looked at last week, where we saw Jesus silence demons who wanted to announce. They tried to announce prematurely who Jesus was as the Son of God. And what we saw last week is that Jesus does have total control over the most powerful soldiers of the enemy. All of that happened at a lakeside in the middle of a raucous crowd of people looking to Jesus for healing. The demons wanted to reveal him, and Jesus silenced them. Now, the backdrop of this scene is very different where we are tonight. So we're reading from Mark, beginning at Mark chapter 3, beginning at verse 13. Okay? Jesus went now up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. I'm afraid that most people today, most U.S. citizens, may not be able to answer, if they were asked, how many members of Congress there are in Washington. And I'd imagine the same is true for most peoples in most nations. How many members there are in their Congress or their parliament or whatever ruling body they have, unless you're in North Korea where you just know there's one. So just for the sake of closure to this, I'll just ask, how many members do we have in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C.? Just shout it out. No, I don't know. Somebody. Who? How many? 435. That's right. How many senators are there? This is easy. Okay. Easy. 100. You can learn something here. See? 435 House of Representatives, 100 senators. How many people are on the president's cabinet, including the president and the vice president? Anybody know? There are 27, including the president, the vice president. There's 15 department heads, and there's 10 cabinet-level members. And no wonder they can get nothing done. You can't have a committee that big and get anything done. How many seats are there in the Kentucky General Assembly? 138. How many in the House of Representatives of the Kentucky General Assembly? 100. So that would mean how many senators are there? 38, right. Most people in our nation and most people in our state probably don't know those numbers because they don't really mean all that much. But I will tell you this. Every single Jewish person knew that there were 12 tribes in Israel, which corresponded to the 12 sons of Jacob. Every single Jewish person knew that. And even though 10 of those tribes have been lost when the Assyrians invaded, that was 700 and some years before this moment here in Mark 3, every Jew knew that God, through his prophets, promised that a restoration was going to come. A restoration they believed would make Israel, would make their nation great again in the eyes of the world. So, that Jesus called 12 of his followers here and gave them this special assignment, if you will, nobody who heard of this happening, no Jew who was paying any attention at all, could have missed what Jesus was doing here. Okay? Jesus was proclaiming here, by this action, by what he did, Jesus was proclaiming here again the same thing that he'd been trying to say all along then, and that he would continue to try to say to people, anybody who would listen to him, that this that he was about, what he was up to, was not just some, first of all, healing mission. We talked about that a little bit. As important as physical healing is, Jesus was about way more than just going around to towns and healing people. Jesus was also saying here that this was more, what he was about was more than just a nice time of revival or spiritual renewal. You know, when God draws close and maybe warms people's hearts. As significant and as important as those sorts of things may be, Jesus was about way more than that. Jesus was here, in fact, making a claim on Israel. He was about nothing less than a revolution. A revolution that would lead to restoration. Not exactly the sort of restoration that most people of his day had in mind. But just the same, the restoration that the prophets predicted and that God promised would come. It would be a restoration that would happen at every level, too. It wasn't just political. It was spiritual, physical, social, and sooner or later it would be political. Which is probably why he went to the mountain, or really more accurately, to the hills. You know, if you've ever seen it, you know, it's not mountains like we think of it. It's big hills. But that's why he went to the hills to have this meeting. You see, not only are mountains known to be places where God meets with his people, reveals his will, like in Moses' life, you know, so also were mountains in Jesus' day the place to go if you were planning a revolution. You know, today is different. Today people go to the mountains to play or to relax. You know, they go there to hike or to hunt or to watch birds or smell flowers or whatever. But not in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, people went to the mountains to plot revolutions because plotters of revolutions would be doing so in the face of current rulers if they stayed in the valleys. And Jesus was no exception to this. He'd already gotten a taste of how it would go if he tried to plan his revolution in the cities. Already the Pharisees and the chief priests were calling for his head. So, like groups today go to the jungle, some groups go to the desert, some groups go to just the barren places of our world to prepare and train and all of that for revolution. Jesus went to the mountain to do some training, to shape his followers into, as N.T. Wright describes, a truly revolutionary group. That's what he was about. What did it involve? What did their training involve? Well, first, verse 12 says that they were to be with him. This was the primary need as, I think, Jesus saw it. You know, for ages, people being trained for ministry, for just about any discipline, really. For ages, if you were trained for something, your training included following this pattern of apprenticeship. You followed somebody that was doing it. You followed them around. You watched what they did. With normal people, though, the problem with training by apprenticeship is that the student was very likely to pick up the teacher's weaknesses and errors, you know, just as easily as the student would pick up the teacher's strengths. Now, that was not a problem here with Jesus, though, because he has no weaknesses, and he makes no mistakes, and he makes no errors. So Jesus wants his followers to really know him, and to do that by spending a lot of time with him before they go out on their own and try to do things for him. So he took special time like this here and there. You see different places and different times where he takes disciples off to the side, off to the wherever. He takes them Really, for 3 years, he did this so that they could be with him. He invested in that way. He gave them opportunity then to catch his mind and to watch his methods, to try to feel what he felt and see what he saw and hear what he heard and how he heard it, you know. He wanted them to come to trust in God the Father just as he did. Do this like I do it. This was, and it still is important, because, you know, it's not just what we attempt to do, or even what we successfully do for the sake of Jesus. Success to Jesus takes our manner and our motive into account as well. In fact, they're even more important than what we accomplish. Contemporary training, contemporary education is tempted to skip this step. Contemporary training methods, they move right to methodology, and they talk about strategies and mechanics, understand your market, become aware of your strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and challenges, threats, whatever like that. And it's not that those things are unimportant. They are important. But to operate with the heart and mind of Jesus is far more important than methodology. That's the reason behind Christian education. And behind Christian higher education, and behind Christian liberal arts education, you know. What concentrated time with Jesus gives us as people, as Christ followers, is integrity. We're not just people going out to change situations, to change other people. We are going out as changed people ourselves. People who have been transformed because we've been influenced by Jesus. Because we've been with Jesus. What we do is never more important than who we are, who we become in Christ. Jesus understood that. So first of all, the disciples would need to spend time with him, just being with him. That was first purpose of going on the mountain. Second, they would be then sent out, and sent out for a specific reason, sent out to preach, the text says. So notice we see the purpose here again. The primary thing that Jesus was about, proclamation, telling people what God had done, what God was doing, and what God would yet do in their world because of Jesus. That was Jesus' chief purpose. And so he names it as his followers' chief purpose. Jesus understood the idea of Romans 10:12. How can people know what God is about unless somebody tells them? You see. Now, yes, of course, we can and we should show Jesus to people with our kind and sincere and generous and patient and virtuous lives. We absolutely can and should show people Jesus in those ways. But you see, apart from us being able to tell people the reason we are who we are, the reason for the hope that we have, if we are never able to verbally articulate faith in Jesus, the world just winds up thinking that we're just very nice people. And honestly, that's where a lot of Christians leave it. And it's easy to do that. I mean, it's easy to leave our witness right there because, you know, nobody dislikes nice people. Nobody resists nice people. Nobody pushes back on people who are nice. Everybody welcomes, everybody enjoys, everybody likes to be friends with kind, sincere, generous, nice people. But the world does resist Jesus. And while often it's easier to just let people think we're nice and leave it at that, we're not fulfilling our mission for Christ when we don't speak when God asks us to speak for Jesus. That's why we need the guidance of God's Spirit. That's why it's so important that Jesus says, don't do anything until you get the Spirit. It's why we need the guidance of God's Spirit, because sometimes it is enough just to let our lives speak. Other times, a definite word is necessary and called for. And so we have to go the next step and let people know that our lives and our decisions and our priorities and any kindness that may be about us, it's all from Jesus. It's all about Jesus. We are about Jesus. Putting clear words to people's perceptions points others to Christ with clarity. And the fact is, people do react to that in different ways. That's just the way it is. And that's okay. They did the same with Jesus. And they did the same with everybody else who follows Jesus. These 12 or 11 in particular. Just the same, Jesus took them aside to teach them how to speak with clarity for him. That was the second part. And then third, we see that Jesus took them to the mountain, verse 15 says, to give them the power to cast out demons. Now, here and there in the history of the church, there have been pockets and places where demons, evil spirits, the manifestations of the power of the devil in our world, those things were either marginalized or neglected or outrightly rejected as things that intelligent, sophisticated people should not talk about, should just ignore. And yet here they are, right here. We see them all through the Bible. We see them all through the New Testament. We see it all through Jesus' ministry. And even here in the most concentrated moment yet of Jesus' training of his disciples. Of all the things Jesus could have covered there on the mountain in his training for this restoration revolution that he was preparing for, he included this because he knew that to neglect or minimize the presence and the power of the devil in our world is to absolutely invite destruction into our lives. Jesus clearly knew and heard the call of our world, begging for, Psalm 51 puts it, a right spirit to be renewed in us, because a wrong spirit is present in our world. Jesus knew that. The enemy has caused and is still causing all sorts of brokenness. And part of Jesus' restoration revolution is to take back what the devil has stolen and to repair what he's broken. So Jesus gave his disciples that power, the power to do what he does with regard to evil spirits. In fact, power to do even more, he says, than what he did. And it all comes by the power of his Spirit. Again, another reason Jesus said, don't try this stuff until the Father sends the Spirit. So like I said, this is the second of 3 instances in a row where Jesus deals with demons and the demonic. Back in the crowds by the lake, Jesus proved he has authority over demons. Here he gives us authority, his authority. And the next time demons come up, just a couple verses later, we'll see that since Jesus was able to control the demons, Jesus was then accused of being one himself, which he rather easily proves to be an illogical and senseless notion. We'll talk about that in the next passage here. But all this to say, you know, with our modern technological prowess, we have all but replaced, in our minds and in our opinions, the presence and the effects of demons with different sorts of physical or mental illnesses, which we then treat with medications and therapies. And even though sometimes medications and therapies are appropriate and effective, don't get me wrong, but regardless of that, there is always still a spiritual reality that has to be addressed because we are spiritual people. The fact is, the enemy is still very real, and there is still a deep brokenness in our world that he has caused, one that only the name and the ministry of Jesus can heal. And just as it was part of the original disciples' task, so is this part of our task, to speak Jesus to the world and to all the brokenness within it by taking authority over the demons and all of the havoc that the enemy causes, and then redeeming and restoring people and situations for God's glory. That's part of the training of discipleship, in Jesus' mind anyway. And to be honest, is probably the weakest link of discipleship training today in the church, at least in our tradition. This passage ends in a listing of people Jesus chose for his restoration revolution. And I might, in closing here, just point out that even in the people that he chose, Jesus is showing us his purpose of restoration and reconciliation. Usually when we get to lists of names in the Bible, no matter where they are, if we're being honest, most of us probably just kind of glaze over that and move to the next where the story picks up again. Because we think lists of names are not interesting. Nothing could be further from the truth. Lists of names are fascinating if you know the story of the names. If you take time to learn what we know, we only know so much, but if you take the time to learn what we know about these 12 men, you wind up amazed at the diversity that's represented here. These are guys from all different walks of life who are suddenly living together, working together, learning to tolerate each other's opinions, points of view, eccentricities, Anybody who has ever shared a room with a roommate not of your choosing, you know how hard this is, okay? Jesus put together here the quiet, reserved ones, and also the sons of thunder. You have ones who work with their minds, together with ones who work with their hands. You have the cautious doubter, and then you have the one who immediately jumps in with both feet, usually where he shouldn't even be. These 12 men make up a working laboratory for the purpose of restoration and reconciliation. These 12 men represent local churches. Undoubtedly, though, the most striking example of this would have to be putting into close living and working proximity Simon the Zealot and Matthew. Simon the Zealot was a hardline nationalist. He was a guy who was ready to fight and die to free Israel from her Roman bondage. And then there's Matthew, who officially represented that very Roman bondage. He collected taxes for Rome from his own Jewish neighbors. So ideologically, these two would have been in polar opposite camps. But Jesus here brings them together for his common purpose: to break down the barriers that evil has built, to restore right order to the nations, to repair broken relationships, to sift through lies until truth emerges, to make people healthy and whole, to bring people together again, and then together with God. That is the sort of revolution Jesus trained his people for. A restoration revolution, to make whole that which the enemy has broken. That was why he took them to the mountain. And that's still the sort of training Jesus' followers need. Because the vision of Jesus has not changed. He fully intends to completely recreate our world into one that reflects his vision, his values, to restore our world to how God created it to be, how God intends it to be. That's what he's about. So here's the thing. When God asks us, you and me, to spend a bit more time with him, not doing, just being with him. When God asks us to spend or to speak a word or two, or maybe 3 or 4, for Jesus, maybe even to a hostile audience. When we encounter true demons on our paths, evil spirits that the enemy has sent to throw us off God's track for our lives. Even when we find ourselves put together, either for a task or some other purpose, when we find ourselves put together with someone, but for Jesus, utterly unlike us. As we encounter these things in life, it's a good thing to remember we can count it all as training. We can count it all as training. Jesus is training us for his purpose. He is working on us, and he is working in us, refining us, and empowering us so we can be his refining and empowering force in this world. So hey, let's embrace any time we have on the mountain, any time we're given on the mountain with Jesus, because not only will we need what we receive from him there in the valleys, we will need it for ourselves. But not only that, the world is counting on us to carry on this restoration revolution that Jesus began here with these 12 guys. Father, help us. Remind us of the greater purpose. Remind us of what we're about by reminding us of what you're about. And in those times when you call us away just to spend some time with you, or any of these other purposes, when you ask us to speak for you, when you ask us to look at the world and see the spiritual warfare that goes on around us, and to have the ability and the courage to do something about it. And when you call us to be partnered with people that we may not particularly like, or that certainly we're not like. Lord, remind us that we are soldiers in training to do a great, great thing, to join you in what you're about in our world in these days. Help us to remember that, Lord. It's so easy to forget. Help us to remember. In Jesus' name, amen.